Good morning, this is Will Faerber from Art to Ride, and today we're going to do a little catch up on Lip. He has really been coming around, and once again, just like Q, remember this horse was a horse that we bought out of a pasture. He was basically a wild thing who had been sent to a trainer as a 2-year-old. He was so wild that they had gelded him, and then they just brought him home and turned him out in the field, and he'd been in there for 5 years when we bought him. He was quite sway-backed and just kind of a wild creature. and so we spent some years with him. Now the last couple of years, of course, because Karen has been building a place in Oregon, his training has just been on and off a little bit, and but we're just beginning to get things to the point where she can get consistent with him. And that's what we're going to see here today, is that just like with Q, once again, this horse we just have to coming back to the stretch, but he's finally beginning to be able to connect across his top line and really settling down about everything. He was a very reactive horse about most things. But really beginning to settle, and just like, as I said, if you remember from even a few years back or whenever with this horse, when we try to lunge him, he would just immediately come behind the bridle. I'm sure that the little work that they had done with him at an Andalusian place had, strapped his chin to his chest and, basically made him crazy. So getting him to relax and come out to the bridle has been a very, very difficult thing with this horse. And of course, giving him the time to wait for his back to come up and heal, which it pretty much has now. He is no longer sway-backed, which just takes time. But once again, the good news is, if you have a sway-backed horse, a horse with a drop back, you can correct that. You're not stuck with what you've got there if you're willing to do the work correctly and give it the time to heal. So you see with him now, and even when he's slow or fast, you see he's really quite connected, that connection between his front and back end. He moves his legs together now, and he's able to stay up. As I said, even just a few months back, if you put the side reins on him like this, he would just curl his chin to his chest and run around you in a circle, kind of wildly. So we see how now that trot has really slowed down, really beginning to develop working gaits here. And his mental attitude towards everything is just finally beginning to relax and accept that we're not going to hurt him. And notice how high he can now, just like with Q, he can maintain that position of his pole up without just curling behind the bridle all the time. In other words, he's beginning to come out to the bridle and seek the contact rather than just come behind it. So many horses today that we see, people think they're light, but they're really just behind the bit permanently. A correctly trained horse takes contact with your hand, but not a pull. It's just a positive sense of energy in your hand, but they don't hang on your hands. Beautifully this trot's coming. He gets a little excited about something there for a moment. Now beautifully staying up in that working trot. So unfortunately, so many people when they ride, they have this idea that they can, pull the horse back onto its hindquarters, make him work through his back, the kind of things that you see people doing endlessly, reining back and these kinds of things that don't do anything but shorten the horse's strides. Which is, once again, not the same thing as collection, let us remember. Collection is just a further development of the working gait. In other words, it's the same thing, just at a higher level of development so that it lifts a little more. It's not a different thing. Today, people tend to think of that collection as something different from a working gait. It's just a higher level of the same thing. And of course, if a horse loses physical ability or muscle, they're not able to collect to the degree they once were. So it's not a trick that you can just call up. It's dependent on keeping the horse physically maintaining at a physical level that allows it to collect easily. You can see he's getting a little excited here about something. We have deer up there in the woods, and there's bears up there, all kinds of things. for him to get excited about. But once again, it doesn't last long now. He has a little moment and it comes back and he rebalances himself and gets himself centered again. And of course, just waiting for them to get centered is what we want to do on the lunge line. I always remind people that, when you want working gaits, if the horse can't do it without you on his back, it has a very little chance of being able to do it with you on their back. So the point of groundwork is to teach the horse to move correctly, and then we get on and see how our weight affects that movement. The horse still may be able to give you a pretty good trot on the lunge line, but isn't strong enough to carry you doing it. But in time, they will be. But when you start trying to force horses to, come together and to engage their back ends, as we see so many people doing, all you really do is shorten the stride. But notice that with him, even with the little excitement that he's done, the gait itself hasn't changed much. Every time he comes back, he's back to a pretty nice working trot, pretty four square balanced. That's looking really good. And once again, notice that once he relaxes a little bit, he reaches into that contact, but he doesn't come behind the bridle. So as I said, once again, until a horse can do that, you really don't want to think about doing much with the bridle when you're riding, because all that would be happening is you'll just be taking contact and the horse will not respond correctly. So the thing to understand about the mouth of the horse, we really can't take any contact with it until it has accepted the bit. So often people with young horses, they want to get on them immediately and ride long before that has taken place. So if the horse's mouth is still opening, is not taking quiet contact, the horse wouldn't be ready to take contact. You wouldn't try to ride them. As I say, we're always going to see these things from the ground before we ask for the same thing from the back of the horse. But how nice this trot's coming in. Once again, you can see even if he raises his head a little bit, it doesn't really affect the gait. The gait stays the same. Now this horse is one that's really built to get underneath himself, which he does very easily. Once he gets in that relaxed state, he's able to lift his back a little bit. Notice how when he halts, this horse halts perfectly squarely almost every time, which shows you that he's very balanced between his two sides. So as I like to say, that's starting to look like something that I might want to ride. Unfortunately, very many people in America grew up with this kind of old idea that horses need 90 days of training and they should be done. Well, you can't even begin to scratch the surface in 90 days of getting a horse to move correctly through its body. You can scratch the surface, but that's about it. So many horses have been ruined by that attitude. 90 days of training, they're on their ride, they're on their backs, and they're trying to do all these things with them. And of course, as soon as you stop, develop them correctly going through the stretch. Now notice that we've come back here and just taken everything off, and now we're just letting him stretch out. So we kept him up in that working frame. That was really beautiful. And then we just took the side reins off and come back to a stretch, just to be sure that's still there. Letting him stretch out a little bit. Remember, when horses are up and we have a lot of engagement, the muscles are somewhat tense, so there's not a lot of blood flowing through them. So we want to come back, give the horse a stretch, really gets the blood flowing through the muscles again. And notice how beautifully, once again, when we used to lunge him, even if nothing, he would curl his chin back to his chest while you were just lunging him. Now the neck is coming out and forward. That's what we're looking for, like that. How nice his canter is, stays nicely connected, even though there's no side reins or anything on him. He balances himself, continues to canter through his top line. Exactly what we're looking for. And once again, notice how square that halt is when he comes to a stop at the end. So that tells you the horse, when he can do that, is using himself very efficiently on both sides. So now we're going to go back in the new direction now and put the side reins back on, bring him up in this direction. So again, I think we've had this, I think he's 10, he was 5, I think we've had this horse nearly 5 years. But on the other hand, he's now only 10 years old and turning into a beautiful horse. Sound, no problems. So here we went ahead and stretched him in the new direction before we put the side reins on. Should do this for a moment. So kind of reverse of the way we did the other side. And once again, notice how nicely that neck is coming out forward. He's not curling behind the bridle. We have that same even step. How the hind leg is coming through equally. It's not being left behind. You realize once you can achieve that stretch, all you have to do is keep coming back to that, and the horse will develop all by itself. So now after stretching him this direction, now she will put the side reins on and do just a little bit more, letting him settle in this direction. Hope everyone has had a good summer. Coming to the end of it finally. Of course, for those of us who live in the West, we're always very happy to be getting near the end of the fire season. Camera just sticking there for a moment. And once you get us in the trot in this direction, it begins to settle down. And once again, notice how he's not curling behind the bridle. And of course, that's something that you could never fix by pulling on the reins, right? You simply have to wait until they trust the bridle again and are willing to seek contact with it. Notice again, beautiful working trot here from him. And that's something that we're just beginning to see, and that's how it works. All of a sudden, one day, they just come together for you if you keep doing the right things. Once again, notice how beautifully he halts there. Such a good boy.